Rise for a flag salute and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. Roll call, please.
All right. Commissioner Morose.
Present.
Commissioner Pollock-Rude.
Present.
Commissioner Sotile.
Present.
And Commissioner Edison.
President.
And let the record show that Commissioner Serco is absent.
Thank you. Welcome to the El Cajon Planning Commission meeting. This meeting is being live streamed on the City of El Cajon website. Appeals of all final decisions of the Planning Commission made this evening must be filed in writing with the City Clerk before 5 p.m. Tuesday, May 30th, 2023, and must include the payment of a filing fee. If you wish to speak on either a non-agenda or agenda item tonight, please fill out a request to speak card located by the agenda and turn it in to the secretary, who will call you up to speak when the agenda item comes up for public comment. We ask that you give us your name, spelling your last name. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. The display on the podium, as well as other monitors in the chambers, will show time counting down. At 30 seconds, the podium clock readout will turn red, signifying you have 30 seconds until the end of your time. Applicants and individuals representing groups of people may be allowed more time if appropriate. All public hearing comments should be addressed to me as the chair of the commission and not to individual commissioners or to staff members. Please turn off all electronic devices if you have not done so already. Pursuant to City Council Resolution 114-79, a commissioner who has received evidence related to a matter before the Planning Commission other than an unescorted view of the subject property is required to disclose such information at the hearing. At this time, we will take comment from any member of the public on any items of business within the jurisdiction of the Commission that is not on the agenda. Under state law, no action can be taken on items brought forward under public comment, except to refer it to staff for administration or place it on a future agenda. If there's anyone who wishes to address the Commission under public comment, please come forward now. Okay, seeing that there's none, we'll move on to consent calendar. A single motion will cover all items on the consent calendar. Does the Commission wish to pull any items on the consent calendar? Staff?
No changes from staff.
Okay, great. This time I'll make a motion to adopt the consent calendar. Do I have a second? I'll second. Okay. Motion made by Commissioner Morose, second by Commissioner Pollock-Rude. Please vote. Okay. Fellow commissioners, due to time, I would like to move the variance up to agenda item number 2 first, and then go to the El Cajon Inn and Suites as agenda item number 3. Any objections to that?
No objection.
No.
Okay, great. All right, with that being said, let's go ahead and move to agenda item number 3. That is the Madar variance. It's a request for a variance. It is CEQA exempt, and staff recommendation is approved. Staff?
Thank you. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. My name is Mike Villione, Senior Planner with the Community Development Department. This item is a variance application submitted by Guy Madar for 829 Wakefield Court to reduce a front yard setback for an accessory dwelling unit. 829 Wakefield Court has a general plan designation of low-density residential and a corresponding zoning designation of RS6. The RS6 zone permits the development of single-family dwelling units and accessory dwelling units by right, provided applicable development standards are observed. Staff enforces these development standards as they are codified. However, Planning Commission may provide flexibility where it determines that special circumstances deprive a property of a right enjoyed by others in the same vicinity and zoning district through a process called a variance. The subject variance application accompanies a building permit for an accessory dwelling unit and requests a reduction in the Garfield Avenue front yard setback from 20 to 14 feet. The subject site, shown in blue, is a through lot with frontage on both the Wakefield Court and Garfield Avenue north of Fletcher Parkway. Through lots are defined by their frontage on two approximately parallel streets, which results in two front property lines with front yard setbacks as opposed to a front and a rear. The lot is developed with a single-family home on a building pad along Wakefield Court, then descends nearly 30 feet toward the front property line on Garfield Avenue. The grade of the slope is approximately 1-to-1 at its steepest, though it becomes more moderate and partially plateaus near Garfield. The property is surrounded by single-family homes in all directions and retains the right of access to Garfield Avenue. The building permit application site plan, shown here, shows the proposed accessory dwelling unit near Garfield Avenue, approximately 14 feet from the front property line over the slight plateau on the slope. RS6 zone development standards, however, require a 20-foot front yard setback from the front property line along Garfield. The proposed ADU otherwise complies with applicable site development standards, including side setbacks, building separation, height, lot coverage, and size as shown in the table. The ADU also proposes parking where none is required. The variance requests a modification of the front yard setback to 14 feet to accommodate this recognized deviation. Relocating the proposed ADU to comply with the required setback would likely necessitate additional costly grading work and/or higher retaining walls. No other modifications of development standards are requested with the variance, and therefore the building permit application will need to comply with any other codified zoning standard. To approve a variance request, the Planning Commission must make findings in Section 1780.060. These are, in short, that the property is subject to special circumstances which deprive it of a right enjoyed by others. 2, the variance would not constitute a special privilege. 3, the variance would not be detrimental to other properties. And 4, that it is consistent with the general plan. Examples of special circumstances in code which may warrant a variance include lot size, shape, location, surroundings, and topography. As stated previously, the subject property is steeply sloped and is a through lot with frontage on 2 streets. The through lot configuration is atypical and is actually prohibited by the subdivision ordinance unless access rights are waived to an abutting street. Similarly, the steep slope is a topographical condition consistent with special circumstances identified in the code. There are, moreover, at least 3 examples of properties within a third of a mile which were granted variance to reduce front yard setbacks due to slope to accommodate permitted uses. These cases are identified in red in the slide. For instance, variance number 39, which is located at 1058 Garfield Avenue directly across the street from the subject property, was granted a reduced front yard setback of 15 feet. Variance number 42, which covers 731 through 837 Haverhill Road, authorized a 15-foot front yard setback for all properties on the east side of Haverhill Road because of, quote, extraordinary circumstances due to topography. As with 829 Wakefield, these properties are situated at the bottom of a slope that descends from Sharon Way. Finally, variance number 105 at 2700 Catherine Street authorized a front yard setback of 13 feet to allow the reasonable development of the property, which has a steep slope and a small building site. These examples also illustrate that the requested variance of 15 feet would not constitute a special privilege, but rather extend a development standard applied to similarly situated properties in the immediate vicinity along Garfield Avenue and Haverhill Road. It is also important to observe that the development pattern of the properties along Wakefield Court and Garfield Avenue appear consistent with the requested project. As shown in the aerial, many of these through lots were divided and developed with dwelling units along both upper and lower streets. The proposed accessory dwelling unit is a permitted use consistent in scale with the surrounding single-family development and would therefore not be detrimental to surrounding properties. The housing element recognizes ADUs as a valuable housing opportunity and encourages their production. The proposed siting of the ADU also respects existing development patterns and topographical boundaries consistent with general plan policies. Staff therefore recommend approval of the CEQA exemption and the variance to reduce the front yard setback to 15 feet from Garfield Avenue so as to be consistent with the approvals and development standards of nearby properties. This concludes staff's report.
Any questions for staff? Okay. Do we have any speaker cards on this?
Yes, we do have one. Guy Madar.
Okay, let's go ahead and open up public hearing.
I'm the owner of the property. I just want to say thank you so much from Mike and Noah for all their help. It's been a long process for almost a year and a half. We had some different information that we got from the city before. It was miscorrected by them. They pretty much helped me a lot. So I do go with whatever they suggested after they explained me over everything in this long process. So thank you so much for everyone.
All right. Any questions for the applicant? Okay.
Were there any negative impacts from neighbors surrounding?
A couple neighbors have reached out regarding the project. Concerns have been related to things like construction impacts and off-street parking. Those things are not, the requirements for off-street parking, for example, are controlled by state law, and actually the site wouldn't need to provide off-street parking, and it does. So I think in that way it sort of supersedes the baseline requirement. The other things, concerns about construction impacts, would be addressed through typical design considerations for building on slopes with appropriate engineering and construction practices required of all building projects.
Thank you.
All right. Well, seeing there's no more speaker cards, I make a motion to close public hearing.
I second it.
All right. Motion made by Commissioner Moreau, seconded by Commissioner Sotile. Please vote. Okay.
Motion carries by unanimous vote of members present.
All right. Looks pretty straightforward to me. It does definitely match the other. One thing I noticed was most of the neighbors in that area have already taken advantage of that.
Oh, the variance, yes.
Yeah. So,
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's a good project. I don't see anything wrong with it at all.
care to make a motion?
I would like to make a motion the Planning Commission approve the variance to reduce the front yard setback from Garfield Avenue to 15 feet, subject to the conditions noted.
I second it.
All right. Motion made by Commissioner Edison, seconded by Commissioner Sotile. Please vote.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Can we start again? I jumped the gun. Oh, there it is.
All right.
Motion carries
And
by
motion
unanimous
carries.
vote.
Good luck with your project. You bet. All right. Agenda item number 3, which was number 2, is the El Cajon Inn and Suites. The request is to consider revocation of deemed approved status for a lodging establishment and approval of a conditional use permit for the continued operation of the lodging establishment. It is CEQA exempt, and staff recommendation is revoke deemed approved status and approve conditional use permit number 2023-003. All yours, staff.
Just 1 second, Mr. Chairman. Apologize.
problem.
Technical
No problem.
difficulties.
You're fine.
There we go. Thank you. So again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a request to consider revocation of the deemed approved status for a lodging establishment at 1368 East Main Street. The establishment is branded as El Cajon Inn and Suites. Additionally, there's a proposed conditional use permit for the continued operation of the use. So the site is located on the north side of East Main Street between Walter Way and East Madison Avenue. The site is a little more than 3/4 of an acre in size and is approved with a 37-unit motel, a total of 37 rooms, and a caretaker unit. The site is currently operating, only utilizing 35 rooms. The development was approved by a site development plan, so there's not an existing conditional use permit that's in place for the use. It was also granted a variance for the northerly property line for their rear yard setback from 10 feet to 5 feet. The adjacent uses do include residential to the west, a boarding care facility to the north, and then retail commercial to the east. And then across the street to the south, we have the Hyundai car dealership as well as a trailer court. So the deemed approved lodging establishment ordinance was approved by the City Council on June 25th of 2019, and it does confer deemed approved status on all existing lodging establishments. It also requires compliance with performance standards and creates a mechanism for the Planning Commission to modify or revoke the deemed approved status for problem properties. The purpose of the ordinance is to provide a common set of expectations and standards that all lodging establishments must abide by to provide guests with clean and safe lodging, to minimize nuisance or criminal activities commonly associated with temporary lodging. So here you can see the performance standards that are required by the deemed approved lodging ordinance. They include registration and management requirements, security measures, property standards, limitations on nuisance activities, and also transient occupancy tax collection. So a notice of violation and the revocation hearing were scheduled for the motel due to an alleged violation of registration regulations for renting a room to a minor, which ultimately resulted in a gunshot wound to the head for a juvenile. In addition, on this slide, staff conducted a review of calls for service during the year 2022. 24 calls were confirmed to be related to medical and nuisance activities occurring at the site during that year. And then staff also did a review of calls during 2023 up and through April 30th. There was only 10 calls for service that were related to nuisance activities or medical calls during that time. So this evening, we have invited a representative from the police department to join us. At this time, I'd like to invite him down in order to talk about the property, talk about the registration violation as well as the shooting, and then answer any questions related to law enforcement.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for having me. My name is Rob Ransweiler. I'm a captain with the El Cajon Police Department. The Deputy Director has asked me here tonight to talk about the incident that occurred on December 12th, 2022, in which a mother of a missing 16-year-old daughter received a telephone call that her daughter was deceased at a hotel on East Main Street. Through an extensive search, officers that were working that day were able to identify the hotel as El Cajon Inn and Suites at 1368 East Main Street, as well as the room in which the juvenile was found inside. She was not deceased, but she had been shot in the head. So officers began and detectives began a very extensive and thorough investigation, as you can probably assume, and spoke to several people as a result of this that were identified as being in that room for several nights prior to the incident, if not, and it's believed to be possibly weeks prior to the incident. That being said, as is already included in your report, the detectives interviewed a 14-year-old juvenile who was staying in one of the rooms. The juvenile identified that a male who was already registered to a separate room in the hotel was approached to rent the room for the juveniles. That male did so. Every subsequent day following that, the 14-year-old juvenile would pay for the room themselves at the registry. And then also in regards to a second room identified at that location that was filled with juveniles for multiple nights, a 17-year-old admitted that they were paying for the room in violation of the municipal code. The room was also rented by a separate adult who was staying on site. So those two adults were staying in separate rooms. They rented the room one night, and then after that, the juveniles were continuing to pay for the rent and keep the rooms open from that day forward. So if you have any questions about that specific incident, I'd be more than happy to take them. I know there's a fairly extensive review in your report.
Yeah, I do have a question. Okay.
Just staying within the scope of what we do for the commission, in regards to who rented the rooms, were they able to identify specifically, without going into the details, who was responsible for taking the rooms?
I can speak definitively to one. The answer is yes. And I don't know that we identified the male who rented the second room. I know that one person we were able to identify was still staying at the hotel on a county placement program.
So specifically for the second incident, you don't know?
There's only one incident. There's 2 rooms.
2 rooms, excuse me,
Yeah.
I misspoke.
Yeah.
So within the second room, you don't know?
I can't say definitively that we identified that male.
No, that was the scope of my question. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, do you know for what purpose were the rooms being rented by the juveniles? What type of activity was going on in those particular rooms?
I can only regurgitate what I've read through the investigation, and there were several runaway juveniles who were staying in the hotel. There was some illegal firearms in the hotel, some drinking, partying, that kind of activity, sir.
Thank you.
Question: you mentioned that when the police arrived, the girl was still alive. Did she die, or did she live?
I'm not aware that she has passed away. I believe she is still alive, but I don't have definitive answer on that. I didn't ask anybody that specific question.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other questions? Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll continue. Again, really the impetus for this revocation hearing was related to the fact that the alleged violation of the registration requirements and then the conduct of renting to a juvenile, and then based on the seriousness of that violation, obviously resulting in a very serious incident with harm to a juvenile. With that in mind, when scheduling the revocation hearing, we did work with the applicant and property owner since they did not have a conditional use permit in place, because if the deemed approved status were to be revoked by the Planning Commission, that would remove their ability to operate. So in conjunction with the notice of violation, we did request that they consider submitting a conditional use permit application. They did move forward with that conditional use permit application and filed that in March. And we also worked extensively with them on an operations and management plan, which is included in the Planning Commission staff report. I've shown the cover of the operations and management plan on the slide here. The conditional use permit application also includes a list of exterior and interior improvements as needed that they're proposing to do. So since the notice of violation, the applicant and property owner have worked cooperatively with staff in order to address these issues, take proactive steps in order to prepare the operations and management plan. Additionally, they've begun work on some exterior improvements. When I visited the site last week and over the weekend, they were doing some construction on the wall along the exterior property line along East Main Street. They are proposing, is my understanding, is some wrought iron security fencing in order to better secure the site, and that they're also proposing to do some landscaping. The applicant is present here, and they will be able to speak to that in greater detail. I also wanted to note that an attorney representing the applicant did file some additional information with the city clerk after the agenda was posted. Copies of that information have been provided at the dais tonight, so I wanted to make sure that that was introduced into the record and that the commissioners have been presented with that information. So staff is recommending that the Planning Commission revoke the lodging establishment's deemed approved status and then approve the CEQA exemption for conditional use permit number 2023-0003, and then approve the conditional use permit number 2023-0003 subject to conditions, and then direct staff to schedule a review of the conditional use permit within the next 90 days. The intent here is to have a consistent recommendation to the other lodging establishments that the Planning Commission has recently seen. Obviously, the applicant hasn't been able to complete the interior and exterior improvements that they've described in their conditional use permit application, so that would give them time to finish with those improvements and then allow the Planning Commission to review the conduct of the use over the next 90 days as they complete those improvements. This slide includes some additional proposed conditions. So in conjunction with the preparation of the operations and management plan, staff worked with the applicant to kind of include, the intent was to include the same conditions that we had for the previous lodging establishments and have those included just in the operations and management plan. After thoughtful consideration, I think staff believes that it would be clearer if we include those as conditions of approval so that all the resolutions are consistent and we're providing the same direction. So if the Planning Commission chooses to move forward with approving the conditional use permit, staff would request that these additional proposed conditions be added. These are the same ones that we've discussed recently. So signing an affidavit acknowledging the requirements of the deemed approved ordinance, and then providing the monthly report to the Community Development Department, listing the number of individuals participating in emergency housing placement programs, completing the human trafficking training, and then additionally completing sexual harassment training if required, and providing copies of applicable training certificates. So just in summary, again, staff's recommendation to revoke the deemed approved status for the lodging establishment and then approve the CEQA exemption for the conditional use permit, approve the conditional use permit with these additional proposed conditions, and then schedule a 90-day review of the conditional use permit to evaluate their implementation. So that concludes staff's presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Yes, Commissioner Edison.
So in reviewing this, excuse me, in reviewing the staff report, there was a lot of structural improvements, which is good. I know that area. I used to run around that area when I was younger. I could run. The condition that I'm worried about is in an area of public safety as far as security improvements. I know they have the gate, but is there anything as far as, or maybe it's maybe a question for the property owner, but as far as camera security detail, is there anything as far as I mean, we have aesthetics. That's good. I believe in that. But as far as like security improvements, so that we're not having so many calls for service.
Yes, the applicant can likely speak to that in better detail. But the operations and management plan does stipulate on-site security requirements. The intent is really through the conditional use permit, if the Planning Commission were to grant it, to be able to evaluate the level of security that they're providing. So in the past, we've talked about, is it necessary to have 24-hour security service, or is it appropriate to just have that, during evening hours, say from, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m.? They have proposed something that they think will work. We don't see a level of nuisance calls at this property that is above the threshold that was included in the updates to the deemed approved lodging ordinance of more than one call per room per year. So we haven't seen the security issues be there, and so the idea was to allow the applicant to implement their operations and management plan, and then we can monitor that over the next few months.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff?
No.
All right, if there's no further questions, let's go ahead and open public hearing. I'm sure we have some speaker cards.
Yes, Sally Schiffman.
Great. And are you going to be doing a presentation? Do you need more than 3 minutes?
I'm going to definitely need more than 3 minutes.
Okay, how much time do you think you need?
I will keep it as succinct as possible. It was coming in at 20 minutes when I was practicing.
All right, why don't
Everything I can to speed it up.
Yeah, why don't we start at like 10 and see what happens from there? We don't want to cut you too short.
Like get a blinky light or something?
Yeah.
Okay. That's fine.
We're flexible.
I'll do my best. And now that I've heard staff's presentation, I can kind of skip through some things.
Okay, great.
Oh, the 10 minutes is already starting. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Sally Schiffman, Schifman. I'm with HWL Planning and Engineering, and I am representing Mr. Neelish Patel, the owner of the El Cajon Inn and Suites, as well as Mr. Sunny Patel, who is the resident manager. We also have with us tonight Mr. Neelish Patel's legal representation, Mr. Robert Garmo. We'd like to thank staff for all their help oh boy, that's going to go quick. We'd like to thank staff for all their help over the last 5 months as we've kind of navigated this process and what has become a changing political environment as we've gone through this. I'm going to be talking to quite a few different things, so I'll try to make it as quick as possible. First, very simple clarification on room count. There are 37 physical spaces on the property. 35 are rented as rooms. One's a maintenance room, one's a laundry room. There's an on-site manager's suite, so that's how we get the 37. As detailed in the staff report and spoken of tonight, the El Cajon Police Department was called to the property on December 12, 2022. We want to acknowledge that this event was, of course, terrible. I think we can all agree that we wish it didn't happen. Unfortunately, gun violence is very prominent throughout the country, and unfortunately, no community seems to be spared from it. And it was this tragic event that has become the catalyst for where we find ourselves tonight. In response to that event, my client was issued his first letter of notice of violation dated December 22nd, 2022. And it was in this letter that the notice of violation to Code Section 17.212.070F was identified. Now, this is a section related to nuisance activity. It lists out different types of nuisance activity, and then it states that deemed approved establishments shall not result in those said activities on their property or contribute to such activities in the area. The letter then went on to explain the process that was in front of us, that noncompliance with performance standards would result in a series of different ever-evolving city interventions, starting with the training for motel management, suggestions for environmental changes like lighting and security systems, additional warnings if that training and environmental changes were not effective or worse, disregarded, and then the potential for additional citations, and ultimately the hearing that we find ourselves at tonight. I do want to just reiterate that this was the process that was laid out for us at the very beginning, and it was only the ultimate end point that would land us in front of the hearing. The letter went on to disclose at that time that the police department had completed a review of the calls for service and found that 24 calls had been made throughout the year. And then the letter requested that the owner prepare a remedy, or what we're calling an action plan, to address the nuisance activities. There seems to be a little discrepancy in the call number, so you're going to see through this presentation that the numbers are fluctuating a little bit. It's possible if staff can provide some additional detail as to that, we would appreciate it. My client and his team did meet with the city on January 9th, and on the 11th, a couple days later, we received a letter formally documenting that meeting from the the Director of Community Development, and it was in this letter that he then laid out suggested efforts to remedy the violation. In this letter, we were then told that there were 67 calls for service during that calendar year. 15 of these were medical related, and so if we were to remove those, that remains 52 calls. 18 of these were for varying disturbance issues, so fighting, battery, domestic violence, etc. 6 were drug related, and the remaining calls were not specified. I believe, Noah, that may be where the 24 calls come in. So those 24 calls are related to, let's call them perhaps preventable. That's the language that was used in the city letter. The letter did state that those 24 calls were in all likelihood preventable. And I think we'd all like to believe that arguing, fighting, domestic violence, battery, drug use is preventable, but I'd like to ask whether it's fair to place the burden of preventing such behaviors in others on an individual business owner. The letter then goes on to reiterate the expectation of meeting the deemed approved status performance standards, and concludes with the suggestion that the property owner and manager consider implementing improved lighting and security measures, and then formally requests this action plan and that it include modified operations, training, and infrastructure and/or physical modifications to the property. Just a couple of days later, January 13th, a new surveillance system was contracted and has since been put in. There are 18 cameras. There was already a system in place. It was, let's say, outdated. So there were 18 new cameras installed around the property, as well as a new monitoring and recording system that brings everything up to current standards. And that is currently in use. It's installed. We did not disclose the plan because we don't want everybody to know where these cameras are, but it's available should the police department need it. They also have access to those recordings should they need it. On January 25th, a response was provided to the city from the property owner's attorney in response to the January 11th letter. In that letter, it was stated clearly that the property owner and manager believed that they had been and continue to be in compliance with the performance standards of the ordinance. And the letter then further broke down those 52 calls for service that were considered nuisance. 8 of those calls were from one family. And this was a problem family. By the time this letter went out, that family had already left the establishment, and they were placed on the do not rent list that was in place. So that family has not been back, and 8 of those calls, which would have been counted, are no longer an issue. One of the calls was placed by a guest when she and her daughter were in an argument, and the daughter locked her out of the room. So it was a domestic case. And then there were the 18 calls that were placed by hotel management, and they were the so-called disturbance calls that were alluded to in the January 11th meeting. And that left 26, let's call them unpreventable or legitimate or valid calls. This equates to, when we look at just those real serious calls, it's 0.74 calls per room per year. So this is well below the used standard of 1 call per room per year. It was also noted in that letter from the attorney that, asking business owners to restrict the calls to service could really have a chilling effect in notifying the police of real serious either criminal activity or medical issues. And the attorney did request that those calls to service not be used against the property in determining nuisance activity. And in fact, the ordinance itself does list, and under the effort to remedy when issues arise at these properties, it does list timely calls to the police department. So we are asking operators to call the police when they need it, but then we're using those calls against them. This letter also included the first action plan as requested by the city. It included the additional security cameras upgraded from what was in place, additional lighting on the site, which has since been installed, added to what was already in place, a uniformed guard walking the property, and this is in addition to the resident manager. A new guest register form was prepared to replace the previous file card system. New and updated signage was placed around the property. This was done in coordination and cooperation with ECPD. And there was a renewed commitment for additional staff training. And then there was also a request by the property owner and manager that regular, maybe monthly meetings, or at least some sort of regular communication be established with the police department in order to go over monthly incidents so that they could stay in front of it.
Great, and I see we ran out of time. How about 5 more minutes? Will that wrap you up, or you think you need more?
I'm going to need more, but I will speed up my timeline.
Okay,
discussion.
and then I know we're going to have some questions for you as well.
Absolutely.
So, okay.
Absolutely.
Put up another 10. That's fine.
That's fine, thank you. On January 27th, the second notice of violation was obtained, and at this point we were also told that the second violation was to Code Section 17.21207, 070B, which is registration requirements, and this was in response to the alleged renting of the room to a minor. By February 7th, the property owner's attorney had gotten in touch with the city attorney. At this point, we're starting to see kind of an escalation of the situation. And at this point, we were told that this hearing, the intent of this hearing was going to be to revoke the deemed approved status. And we were also asked to go ahead and submit for the conditional use permit as a backup option. Regardless of this kind of looming threat, the property owner continued moving forward in cooperation with the city. February 10th, a new lighting system was contracted for and has since been installed. And February 15th and 16th, another meeting was had with the city, at which point the action plan was reviewed, adjusted, and moved forward with. And by March 1st, I was retained to help them with their use permit. So everything was moving ahead quite quickly. March 6th, again, Mr. Patel is working with Mr. Alvey consistently. That's what we're trying to show here. March 14th, Eagles Point Security was retained. They started doing night patrols. They walk the site 4 times every night, 7 days a week. And then this is, of course, in addition to the resident manager that's there during the day. March 19th, a new fence contract was established. The fence, as those of you who have gone by the site, the fence is being installed. It's 230 feet of fencing along the entire frontage. And by March 27th, we do, I don't know how that's happening. March 27th, the progress report is given and a new request to meet with ECPD is requested. This meeting never occurred, but we were able to obtain the call record from this last year. This is where we get the 10 calls. There were 18 total. 8 of these were either non-coded or medical calls. That left 10 valid calls to the site. Given that number in comparison to last year, the site is actually on track to have a 40% reduction in calls to service this year. And that's a direct result of the actions that have been taken already. So the new lighting, the new security system, surveillance system, et cetera. I apologize for this. March 30th, the use permit's submitted. By the end of April, we get feedback from staff, we make adjustments, everything is submitted. May 5th, the hearing is published. I don't know why it's doing that. It's certainly not making this faster. Okay, I realize that was a lot of information. We felt it was important to go through that timeline. We just want to make it very clear that the property owner and manager has been working very closely with staff. The intent is to get this site back to where you guys feel that it's in compliance the way that the owner and operator already felt it was. So now before you, you guys have the choice. Do you revoke this permit or do you allow them to retain their deemed approved status? Jumping forward a little bit, again, here's your ordinance section on efforts to remedy. And again, I just want to point out, calls to the police department are listed as a legitimate and useful remedy to a situation on site. The second bullet point here is, the way it's worded is a little wordy, but basically it's saying that the property operator can request that those that are having activities that could result in a violation, so those doing illegal activity, they can ask them to stop. The important caveat here is that the code itself says this should only be done if the person feels safe doing so. So those, quote, nuisance calls, the 18 calls, it's arguably valid for someone to call the police if they feel that they're threatened or their guests are threatened. And again, those calls shouldn't be held against them. And then there are findings that need to be made. Does the operation of the establishment constitute a nuisance? Is the owner or operator unable or unwilling to abate the nuisance? And is the nuisance a threat to the public health and safety of the community? I don't know if that's because of the timing that it keeps doing that. I apologize. As to the first violation of Code Section 17212.070B, registration requirements for allegedly renting to a minor. As has been previously explained to city staff, and we'd like the record to show tonight, the site manager maintains that they did not rent a room to a minor. They rented the room to an adult. That adult was included on the guest register that was on file and in accordance with the performance standards of the ordinance. To continue to ensure that compliance with that code section be met, the guest register has been updated. It does now include specific statements that include no one under the age of 18 is permitted to rent a room, and that anybody on the premises that is under the age of 18 must be accompanied by a parent or guardian. And we believe that this action addresses the violation concern. The second violation is of Code Section 17212.070F, which identifies those nuisance activities and states that establishments should not contribute to or be the source of such activities. And I'm almost done, I promise. This is where I'd really like to go back to those findings. So first, does the operation of the establishment constitute a nuisance? The owner's already requested that calls for service not be used against the property. By equating calls to service to nuisance activity, the city really does run the risk of discouraging citizens from reporting crime or requesting help. We can all rationally agree that restricting or discouraging anybody from calling the police when there's a criminal activity or a medical emergency is not really the intent of the city or the code when asking that these establishments not contribute to these activities. However, since this is the metric that the city uses, as demonstrated, we have shown that there is, even last year, there were 26 legitimate calls. That's 0.74 calls per room per year. We're on track for 40% less this year, and that is below the standard used. We would argue that that is not a nuisance. This establishment does not sell drugs or alcohol. It does not employ prostitutes. It does not allow for or encourage loitering. It does not facilitate human trafficking or condone domestic violence or allow for the storage of stolen goods. The owner and the resident manager certainly don't excuse and by no means encourage nuisance activity on their property. And we recognize that there are problems and have been problems with some guests here and at other hotels in the city. But the owner and the manager are committed to working with the city to continue reducing unwanted activities at and around the property. Which brings us to the next question. Is the owner and operator unwilling or unable to abate the nuisance? While we believe that the property is already in compliance with the performance standards set forth in the code, we've definitely made it clear tonight that Mr. Patel is able and willing to work with the city on what is being requested of him. As to the abatement of those nuisance activities, it's admittedly harder, but it's not impossible. The manager and staff will be given additional training in operations and security, and additional support for the site has already been established. They've hired private security, they've installed an updated surveillance system, they've increased lighting and installed site fencing, and they continue to cooperate and communicate with ECPD. And finally, is the nuisance a threat to the public health and safety of the community? We've seen the news stories and we've read the articles from the last almost 9 months now. We understand the political pressure that city staff and decision makers are facing right now as it comes to these hotel vouchers and how many may be issued to individuals in the city of El Cajon. We know that public safety and support services are strained, and we understand that city officials feel that they're perhaps carrying an extra burden in the county. But we maintain that we can hardly pinpoint the problem to one establishment or one location or one operator. The city has already revoked the status of 2 deemed approved establishments. 4 or 5 more establishments may come before you after the one tonight. And perhaps there is a nuisance threat to the public health and safety of the city that may or may not be tied to the influx of hotel vouchers. But this nuisance does not stem from the El Cajon Inn and Suites. And we ask that you not impose burdens on individual business owners, such as Mr. Patel, that the city itself cannot shoulder right now. And we ask that you not punish business owners for struggling public policies. The city, the owner and the manager have been working diligently with city staff since the violations were issued. Countless letters, progress report meetings, phone calls, emails. The owner has installed an upgraded surveillance system, private security, new fencing, new landscaping.
Okay, Mrs. Schiffman, your time is up. Is there anything that you have not shared with us that you still want to bring forth, or have you got all the...
Sure. The last thing that we would like to say is that the property owner has a different request for tonight than staff's recommendation. We ask that rather than revoke the deemed approved status, that they be allowed to retain their status, and that therefore you would not need the conditional use permit.
Okay, great. I have some questions. So I feel like maybe there's some confusion with the deemed approved versus a CUP. Anybody that comes into this city and wants to run a business or a motel, they go forward and they get a CUP. Many of these did not have CUPs due to the fact of their age. And so the deemed approved status was put in place for those guidelines. The CUP does the exact same thing. It gives guidelines. It actually clears things up, makes things a little bit easier for you to work with the city, for you to work with the police department, and everyone has a set expectations. And those set expectations are in the conditional use permit. There's not one business in this town that doesn't have a CUP. So the deemed approved status was a way to grant owners the right to continue to have business with a set of guidelines. And if those guidelines were not met, then we were going to bring any business back to follow under a CUP. So to keep the deemed approved status and not a CUP, I don't really know what the difference is for you guys. What is the problem with that, having a CUP versus the deemed approved status?
Sure. So we actually would just simply say the opposite. If there's no difference, why impose it? Mm-hmm. So there are a set of standards. Those standards were either being met or, in working with staff, are being brought up to the standard that the city would like to see. There's really no difference in imposing the use permit and not imposing the use permit. And so we would ask that it not be imposed. Okay.
Next question, and maybe this is for the applicant. When there were underage kids, according to the police department, having parties and doing things, did anyone call the authorities at that time to say, hey, there might be some activities going on here with underage children that probably should be taken a look at? Was there any calls?
I would need to defer to the property manager.
Okay, great. Any other questions before we go to the, yeah.
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
From what the police department has stated is that it was a 14-year-old boy, I believe, went to the room and paid cash in order to renew for the next night. Is there something implemented where that would not happen again?
I would also have to defer to property manager.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I saw a couple times in here regarding the keys and how they were issued. The keys they have, is it like a fob system they have that they can turn on and off, or is it an actual physical key that they give? Is it some sort of updated system?
It is a physical key to get into the rooms, yes. It's a key.
Is there any way that they could potentially maybe do a fob system or something they could turn on and off? Because that seems kind of a security issue when you're issuing keys and people can go make copies of keys and go back. I know that they change it, quite often, but I think a fob system would be easier just to quickly disengage that room and change it to another code for someone else. It's just a potential suggestion.
I do not know how expensive fob systems are to install and on all the rooms. The property owner has invested over $50,000 in just the last 5 months to address some of these concerns, and we don't know the answer.
Gotcha. I'm just saying for security purposes, because I know that's an issue, for keys and things like that. So, thanks.
Yes, Commissioner Edison.
Thank you for your extensive report. I took the notes, and I do appreciate the fact that you were very thorough. I'll try to keep it just out of respect for everybody's time and the scope of what we do here. What preventative measures were implemented prior to the December 12th incident? Were there any red flags from the property owner prior to any changes?
To this specific incident?
Correct. I believe it's December 12th.
I would have to defer to the property manager.
Okay. As far as, are they going to speak tonight, Chair?
Do we have any other speaker cards?
We do.
Okay, great. Okay.
I think I'll just defer those. I do appreciate the thoroughness of what you've said tonight. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next speaker card.
Robert Garmo.
Great, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Robert Garmo, Garmo. I'm the attorney for the owner. I was actually involved prior to this hearing being set to, quote unquote, abate the nuisance that was alleged. The owner has retained legal counsel to brief the issue of the deemed approved statute. I know it's been admitted into the record. I would like to read 3 excerpts from that, just so that we're clear. And so this is in your brief letter. So on page 4, the deemed approved lodging establishment that was approved by the City of Council on June 25th, 2019, is being applied in an unconstitutional manner in violation of the U.S. Constitution and the FHA. Discriminatory and over-enforcement of the ordinance by the city is in violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The ordinance itself on page 9 states that it gives great discretion without proper limitations to the city and code enforcement officers to revoke the use statutes as it is being proposed here, and it's violative of due process. It is common knowledge that a municipality, and this is on page 7, in abating a claimed public nuisance will first attempt to resolve the issue informally, and if required to do so formally, required to provide procedural due process as well. Prior to December 2019, not one single letter was sent to the property owner that says, oh, hey, you guys are violating something. Something's going on here. The first letter all the letters that were sent before were about the use of the vouchers. That's the fact. With the first letter that came in, I believe it was December 22nd, didn't even mention the December 12th incident at all. It just says, oh, there's some nuisance going on. It was a January letter that then said, hey, there was a major incident on December 12th or 14th, whatever that was. For the record, this property does not rent to minors. It does not. They rented to 2 occupants that were adults that were renting 2 other rooms. They do not rent. That is not their policy. It's never been brought up before.
Can I ask you a question on that? You said there's 2 adults that rented 2 rooms or 2 adults that rented multiple rooms?
So 2 adults, they had their own separate room.
Sure. Okay.
And then they each said, hey, we have family coming in from out of town. They rented rooms, another room each,
Okay.
and paid for it. I'm not sure if they paid for a day or 2 or 3 in advance. The owner can tell you that. But then they paid for it. After the fact, who paid for additional days, I'm not really sure, and I'm not going to, make statements that I'm not sure about. This property was substantially in compliance with the deemed approved statute. It was. The numbers have gone down significantly over the last 2 years since the new manager, Sunny Patel, has taken over. They've made substantial improvements to the property, irrespective of the city of El Cajon saying, there are too many calls, blah, blah, blah. They're just trying to clean up the property. The owner, Mr. Patel, owns 3 hotels in El Cajon. He owns a piece of the one right across the street. His intent is, he is embedded within the city of El Cajon. He wants the best for the city of El Cajon. So this allegation that they were, that all hell broke loose and minors were renting rooms and partying was going on, that incident occurred, unfortunately, when Sunny Patel had to go undertake a medical procedure, and he was gone for a few days. Unfortunately, that happened. It was a tragic incident, but that can happen anywhere. That can happen. I do hospitality. People have been found overdosed in the Hyatt. No one can stop stuff like that, especially with gun violence. And for me, I've been in the city of El Cajon now for about living, and my office was across the street for 28 years now. It used to be that when the city, code enforcement, the police officers had a problem with a property, they would notify them. Hey, we have a problem. Let's work it out. It seems like what you guys are doing now with this deemed approved is heavy-handedness. Well, what's the difference between CUP and revoking deemed approved? It's pretty much the same. It's not pretty much the same. We're being told by Mr. Alvey here and by enforcement that, hey, in 90 days, we're going to be, looking down your throat, staring at you to make sure everything is done, every, T crossed and I dotted. So there is a difference. There's a difference. And the difference is that the overreaching that the attorney is talking about and the vagueness. Well, we think, 10 calls are too much. Well, we think that you should do this and with that. It's too vague. Like, what should he do? They're doing everything possible. A substantial compliance is what we all want. 100% compliance is not possible. If that's the issue here, if say we want 100% compliance, that's not going to happen. Sorry. Now, substantial compliance will happen, and it is happening. And so, to revoke the deemed approved status, as if it's going to change anything, it's not going to change anything with operations. It's going to take some rights away from the owner. It's going to do this big brother oversight that, hey, we want to see what you're doing in 90 days. Well, we're not happy here. We have been begging the city and the police department on behalf of the owner to have more productive communications with the police department. Hey, let us know what we're doing right and let us know what we're doing wrong. We're all partners here. No communications. Nothing. I mean, it used to be that they were back and forth. I led several years back to where the city of El Cajon had an amazing meeting with all the hotel owners and educational classes back and forth as a partnership, the business owners. It seems now this is very aggressive. Me against you, you against us. It shouldn't be that way.
Question for you. So the deemed approved was put in 2019.
Right.
Do you know how many CUPs have been revoked in the city of El Cajon in the last 50 years?
No.
0. So the heavy-handedness, I don't agree with that. I think it's an opportunity to open up dialogue, because if you don't, do you think anyone changes without a little bit of coercion as far as, hey, you better clean your room or else? Because I don't see that happening here. What I'm seeing happening here, it's got nothing to do with any type of placement programs in the city. What it has to do with is proper management, in my opinion. There has never been a CUP revoked, and it's not going to happen on my watch, I'll tell you that much, but it would be nice if we could all work together. And I do believe that communication starts here. Unfortunately, maybe it should have started a year or two ago. I believe there's a program between owners in the city. What's the name of the program for the hotels that everyone participates in?
Oh, Homestart? Or, crime-free. Well, we have
Yeah, the crime-free.
and
and
crime-free
there-
multifamily housing.
Right,
but
yeah,
it's
there's different things. So we've seen it work. And, I don't see, this isn't the type of city, we're not Big Brother here, We want to make sure, but this was a major incident. I mean, this was a major incident. And had that girl not been shot, what would be going on today? That's my question. What would be going on at that establishment? Status quo? Would there be security cameras going in? Would there be new gates? Would there be any, or would it just continue till somebody else got hurt? I mean, that's my question.
Well, with all due respect, Commissioner, the status quo was 24 calls in 2022. That which is far less than 35. Mm-hmm. So the status quo wasn't bad. This was a tragic incident. It was horrible. No one can deny that part of it. And to say communications, we've been begging for communications from the city. Nothing was sent to the property, and this is an important factor. Nothing was sent to the property owner, alerting them, scolding them, yelling at them to say, hey, get your act together, until December 2022, 5 months ago. And to say, well, we're not doing it to retaliate for the vouchers and all that. Look, I'm not going to lay blame on whether that was the reason why we're here or not. I don't know. Mm-hmm. It seems like it is. But if it's not the reason, if it's that one single incident, where was the communications before that incident? To say, hey, you're in violation. Get your act together. None, right? That violation is very serious. And again, they do not rent to minors. Now, does it slip here and there? By the way, just for the record, there are lots of families that live on this property. Lots of children that live on this property. Is it possible that a parent can send their 14, 15-year-old kid to say, here's a couple of $100 to go pay? Sure, I guess it's possible. But that doesn't state that they're renting to minors. That's a different, reach.
Sure. Yeah, Commissioner Henson. Yes.
So, first, thank you for coming. I would like to agree 100%. This isn't a city versus businesses, by all means. This is part of the process that you want. This is part of the dialogue. At no point did any commissioner up here say anything about vouchers. This isn't about vouchers. This is that's a different room. What we're talking about is an incident that occurred on December 12th, where a minor had no business in there, according to the standards that I've read from the staff report. They had no business in there. That wound up, to use the word tragic is probably an understatement. This isn't adversarial, at least from the commissioners up here, that this isn't adversarial by any means. This is to try to figure out what's going on. When you mention there's no dialogue between El Cajon Police Department and you, I would argue that iota is on the owner. Now, I agree 100%. We all agree that the purpose of a business is to create revenue. We know that. That's why they're there. But at the same time, the purpose of a business is to create a positive environment for the city. And when I look at this and I hear, is there going to be a minor that's going to be in there from time to time? Well, it could slip through. That doesn't work for me. And what my question to you is, because I don't want to get into tit for tat, because I don't think that that's productive. When I read the staff report, it says that somebody rented the rooms for these youth. My question to you is, what mechanisms have been put in place to ensure that doesn't happen again? Because when I'm reading the staff report, I don't have a name. What name can be put into there for accountability for El Cajon Police Department to hold them accountable? What have you done?
Well, so first of all, we do have the names of the people that rented the rooms, because they had been renting the other rooms. So
Okay,
we
thank
have
you.
that.
Okay, thank
and
you.
I believe we had presented that to the police.
I'm just going by what I read.
So when you say the staff report suggests that there are minors in there are minors in there. So, there are, I think the last time I spoke to Sunny Patel, there were like 15 minors in there. 3 or 4 or 5 families with 2 or 3 kids each. Maybe more, maybe less today.
The issue isn't with minors in the room. The issue isn't with minors in the room. The issue is there supervision of the minors in the room? I think that is a better question.
Right. And I think to the second question, and I think that's a valid question that you pose, is, well, what standards and what are we doing today to prevent any incident that's occurring? I think that's the important question here. And that, to register now at the property, every single person that is going to be staying in the room has to provide either an ID, a name if it's children, the parents' ID, and so forth, so that they know who the occupants of the room are.
So my question is, prior to this incident, was that in place?
I think to a certain extent it was.
It's
maybe,
a yes or no. Was it?
Yes. I want to say yes. And the reason I say to a certain extent is because it is very difficult to implement and oversee that a lot of people, because if there are 3 people in the room, the fee is more than there's 1 person in the room, for example. And so a lot of people would hide the fact that they have another person in them with them. They might be in a car and so forth. So for the manager to have to walk around all the time and supervise that, it's kind of too, cumbersome. But yes, there was in place a registry with all guests. They had a do not rent list. They had lots of hotel procedures to go through with all the guests. And that's why there were only 24 incidences, in a full year.
Well, the final thing I just want to, forgive me, Chair, the final thing I just want to say, this isn't an adversarial. I just want to reiterate, this isn't something that is about. This is about a conditional use permit and an approved status. That's our scope for today. This isn't about anything other than that. I will tell you that it makes it very difficult if you're asking for the El Cajon Police Department to assist you when they don't even know who's in the room. Would you agree?
I would say in the vast majority of times we do know who is in the room.
No,
we know,
in all, the point of just my final point, because I don't want to monopolize time. The business is that you want to have rooms for rent. That's the business. It comes with responsibility, and part of the responsibility of knowing who's in there. And if you have incidents and you call El Cajon Police Department, how are they going to be able to help you if they don't know who they're looking for? That you're saying there could be 10 to 15 minors in a room, but they don't know. I guess we can come to an agreement that it's a little bit difficult. I think that's what it is.
well, I mean, there are registered guests. There are occupants and there are visitors, right? There's registered guests and visitors. And running a tight ship is that's the point here, is to run a very tight ship, to say we want to know who every single person in this property is. And that is really what, and I've had dozens and dozens of conversations with ownership and management. That is their intent, is they want to know who is in there. In case somebody burns the property down, breaks anything down, they want to know that. So it isn't that I think the important factor is there is a partnership. Ownership, like I said, owns multiple hotels in El Cajon and wants to improve the property structurally, aesthetically, operationally, in every aspect of the way. They want to partner up with the city to find common solutions to drugs and crimes and all that other good stuff. Right. So I don't want to see it adversarial. Honestly, it doesn't benefit the city and it doesn't benefit the business owner. And so when this hearing was set in place, as opposed to when we first started, hey, there are these violations, take care of them. And we responded and it said, okay, we have an action plan, a hotel action plan. Here it is. A day later, it says, nope, we're not happy with this action plan. We're going to a hearing. I think that's adversarial, in my opinion. Right. It could have said, well, I'm sorry, you could work on that and this and that, but nope, we don't like it. We're going to a hearing. So you're saying it's not adversarial. From where we're standing, it looks adversarial.
Right. Any other questions for Mr. Garmo? Because we're out of time for him. Did you have a question?
I just have a quick question, just to try to get some clarification here, because I know that the officer stated that one of the rooms that was rented by a person who did have one of those little vouchers, which is fine. You said that they were renting it for family, but if they did have a voucher, I'm just trying to understand how they would have then rent another room for a family if that they were there on a voucher system. Not saying that that's bad. I don't really care about the vouchers or not. Everyone deserves a room, but I'm just trying to get the policies in place that common sense is there, that if someone is there on a voucher and they're renting another room, why would they need to rent that other room? And if they are, then great. If there is family coming, then let's just have the registered guests there so we can write everything down so we know who's there, just for a safety factor. That's all. And we're not trying to be adversarial or we're just trying to get the processes in place so, he can have a great establishment where money's coming in and there's less calls and less. It's just like guidelines. We're not trying to control the system. We're just trying to make it effective for you and for the city of El Cajon, for that matter. So
Yeah, and I think, again, I don't want to misspeak. The additional rooms were not paid by vouchers. They were paid.
No, I understand they weren't paid by
other-
vouchers, but when I was listening to the officer, he said that the one that was rented, the person who rented the room was on a voucher, but I may have misunderstood that. That's
He
all.
may have been on the voucher. The second room that they rented was not on the voucher.
He paid. It was paid for. Yes.
For family. That's
Yeah.
right.
Great. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Barbara, a couple questions for you. So, he had cited some stuff regarding deemed approved, and I know that we went through this. Is there any unconstitutionality that we're dealing with here with the deemed approved? And also, isn't this hearing considered due process?
Absolutely. This is due process right now. This hearing regarding what's known as a regulatory taking, that's taking a property without entering it or moving it over to something else. It would be depriving an owner of most, if not all, of the economic benefit of the property. That has not happened here. This applicant is being given a chance to get a CUP and continue operation. There is no taking. So any kind of constitutional taking, Fifth Amendment argument is unripe. It's not ready yet because they haven't lost anything. They're still doing business. They still have people in the rooms. They also bring up in passing an equal protection argument that this particular officer's, this particular owner is being treated differently. Everybody has deemed approved status, everybody. And some of those deemed approved have a CUP as well. So that doesn't hold water. There are assertions and assumptions about the constitutionality without any specifics. And the Fourth Amendment warrant arguments I don't understand because this was a call for service from outside. One of the cases that Mr. Weiser cited, L.A.V. Gage, in fact says that the exercise of police power frequently does impair property rights. And what's important is balancing that impairment on the property right against the public interest. And the case that wasn't cited in this letter that's leading on the question of the constitutionality of deemed approved status is Hotel and Motel Association of Oakland versus City of Oakland, in which it was found, just like here, the association's facial takings claim was unripe. The ordinance changing non-conforming use to deemed approved was constitutional, so that the operators had to comply with new maintenance and habitability standards in order to retain their status. The city was not required to provide the association with individualized notice or hearing. The city ordinance, which required deemed approved hotels to comply with new maintenance and habitability standards, was rationally related to a legitimate state interest and thus did not violate equal protection. The association failed to demonstrate that ordinances were impermissibly vague in all applications, as is required to challenge facial validity of ordinances on vagueness grounds, and the absence of an intentional, let's say, bad feeling towards this particular operator doesn't matter. That's not one of the factors to be considered. What's to be considered is that balance between regulating activities that are can inherently lead to criminal activities or nuisance type activities, and balance that against the amount of the loss of benefit. And several cases that Mr. Weisner cited actually said that all economic interest benefit of the use property must be shown before there's a deprivation. So that didn't happen at all here.
I have a question
Yeah.
To Barbara. On this report here, I read the unconstitutionality of discriminating against that particular group of people, and it specifically mentions...
Excuse me, what, are you talking about the letter?
Yes, the letter.
Oh,
yeah.
okay, yeah.
It talks about protective class.
Yeah, I think
When did
that's
homeless
kind of a
become
red herring here. The protected class that they would be talking about with the 42 USCA 3604, which is cited here, are race, color, religion, sex, familial status, or national origin. Nothing else is mentioned.
It doesn't mention homelessness.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you. Any other speaker cards?
Yes. I do have a couple speaker cards from the Nilesh Patel and Sunny Patel. I didn't know if they wanted to speak.
Did you both want to speak, or one person on behalf? Okay, great. Why don't we do this? I'm going to give you a little more time. I'll give you 5 minutes, and then for both of you, that way you can speak on their behalf.
Thank you. I am Sunny Patel. I am the operator.
Yeah.
I hadn't originally planned to speak, just fill out the card just in case if there were any questions. And I see that you had questions. I appreciate this opportunity to answer any questions on the operations side that you might have. What I'm looking at is prior to the December 12 incident, everything looks okay. After the December 12 incident, certainly everything has improved now. So just about all the discussions today is around that December 12 incident and some issues about the registration process. So if I can take a couple of minutes, looking at the time is going really late. Appreciate you guys. So this is what I wanted to make sure. The first room was rented by an individual who was 56 years old male, living with his wife and a dog, has been living in another room, renting that room by paying himself for about a few weeks. He's the one who came to the desk. As Robert had said, I was absent at the time, but the staff report tells me. So when he came to the desk, he used his identification. He rented the room, stating that he had some family members who were going to come by, and he had needed another room, since his room would not be able to accommodate a lot more people. We also have a rule of maximum of 4 people allowed in a room if it has 2 beds. So that is how he rented that room. Now, I believe that room was being paid a couple of days at a time, 2 nights in advance or 3 nights in advance, something like that. So 2 or 3 times the room was paid over that week. So it's not every day this was happening. Now, that person who rented the room, it's possible he may not have come back and pay since his family was in the room, and maybe the rooms that was occupied, probably one of the minors might have come at the desk and paid, which is not usual practice, but once in a while that happens. So that I'm suspecting that might have happened. But at the same time, after about a couple of times it was paid and rented, the person who rented the room was actually warned by our staff that you are violating the unregistered people on the premises. One of the rules that we have is we never allowed anybody who is not registered even to be on the premises. Registered guests only, ours might be the only establishment who is doing that, that if you are a registered guest, you are the only one allowed. And if anybody has to come in and see you, you have to go outside the premises and see. Even to going off a little bit, Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, or any DoorDash or anybody, taxis comes in, we tell them to park in the middle, not in one of the parking spots, pick up and leave. So that is how we are enforcing that all the time from last 2 years at least. So now, going back to when this couple of times it was noticed that there were more people than 4 in this particular room that was rented, this was brought to the attention of the person who had rented the room with his identification, the 56-year-old male. So he decided, or I don't know how it happened, but one of his friends who was living in another room, who was a 41-year-old male living with his wife and 2 little children, he also was not on a voucher program. He used to be on a voucher program before, but for the last about maybe 10, 11 days or something like that, he was a self-pay customer also, and he decided to use his identification to rent another room so that they can at least comply with no unregistered people or more people rule. So that is what was done by the staff member at the time. That's how the second room was rented, and that is how the whole history about the 2 rooms rented by the 2 other people were there. I just wanted to clarify that.
Great. Any questions?
Any questions?
Real quick. What resonates with me is you don't know how that happened.
So, say again, I'm sorry.
You said you don't know how it happened, how the other room got rented.
No, I don't know if the person who had rented the first room was asking the other person to rent the second room or something like that. But
and so just out of respect for your time,
yeah.
That's the issue I'm having. You don't understand how the situation happened, and that's concerning.
No, what I'm saying is that I do not know the communication between them, how that second person who also was an adult male was renting the room, staying with his family, decided to come and rent a second room so that more people could be placed there. He used his identification, proper registration was done properly under his name. And both of those people who had rented those rooms, after the December 12 incident, both of them were still in-house. They were also still renting those 2 rooms, and everything was provided to the law enforcement, all documentary proof.
Thank you.
Yes.
They rented the 2 rooms for family. Now, if you have registered guests and they're supposed to be, in the system, did they give any names to who was supposed to be into those rooms that they were renting, or did they just get a key for these people in these rooms and there was no names given as to who was supposed to reside in these rooms?
He just rented the room and said that they had family members who were coming to the town for a few days, and then they needed the room.
Okay, so they got the key, and then... So
they were the one who were given the key, yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that.
Take your time.
You bet.
I do have one card. Mr. Patel, you're not speaking? Okay.
All right, any other?
No more cards then.
All right, seeing that there's no more cards, I'd like to go ahead and make a motion to close public hearing.
I'll second.
Motion made by Commissioner Moreau, second by Commissioner Rude. Please vote.
Motion carries by unanimous vote of members present.
So, fellow commissioners, one thing I did notice is that staff obviously put a CUP application in place prior to this hearing so that there would not be a loss of revenue or a loss of business, or that the business wouldn't have to cease. In fact, this is our third hearing now, and I think we've seen that pattern. We're not a heavy-handed city. We don't want to strip people of their property rights or their rights to make a living. So I would say that staff followed the right course in making sure that there was a CUP in place, or one that we could vote on tonight. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
I agree with you. I don't think, just to counter what was said tonight, we're not an adversarial city. I actually believe the opposite. I think our city is one of growth. I think that there's some concerns and there's some room for correction. I think there's nothing wrong with room for correction. If the property owner is agreeable to maybe some of the terms and conditions that the staff may present, I think that we might be able to find a happy medium.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, can I just clarify
Yeah.
Just a little bit further? I did want to note that staff was cooperating with the operator and applicant since December of last year. One of the things that staff didn't want to do was jump to a conclusion. So we allowed the police department to pursue their investigation and to move forward and get the relevant facts so that we could make sure that we were taking the correct course of action. So we did start, as the timeline was described, with the letters and then moving on to the notice of violation. As the Planning Commission has stated, we did work with them at that time to make sure that they had the opportunity to apply for the conditional use permit simultaneously so that there were options in place for the Planning Commission to consider. I think the one thing that I want to clarify is the difference between the deemed approved status and the conditional use permit. So the deemed approved status is really just a baseline. So the baseline is like the minimum registration requirements and minimum other performance standards. So the conditional use permit gives the Planning Commission the flexibility to add additional conditions of approval. So I think during the testimony you heard tonight, there was unknown information about some of the people that were staying, the guests that were staying there, who was doing what. One of the things that we worked on in the operations and management plan was a more robust registration system above and beyond what the code allows. And so that's the opportunity that the Commission has with the conditional use permit, is to apply those additional detailed conditions to this operation to make sure that it's operating in a compatible fashion with surrounding properties and uses, and not having an excessive demand on the police department for calls for service. The other thing that we want to say is that we want someone to call the police department when there's an emergency, but we also want them to be responsible for the maintenance and security on their property. We don't want to be using the police department as a security guard or for the benefit of one particular property owner. It's a situation that comes up frequently when maybe we have a vacant house where we have people that are trespassing and so forth. We can't have the police department acting as their security guard. It's their responsibility to properly maintain and make sure that the security is present on their property. So I think just in summary, the reason why you have the recommendation from staff is because we did see that failure in the registration process that they had here. And staff believes that it warrants additional details in a conditional use permit to hold the property owner accountable moving forward. If you were to just retain the deemed approved status and not implement the conditional use permit, they could go back to those procedures that they had in place, earlier this year or last year, and the city wouldn't have an ability to require anything above and beyond the deemed approved status regulations. So it's really that tool that you have to make sure that it's properly regulated, operating in a compatible fashion with surrounding properties and uses, and that the conditions there are appropriate. And then the intent isn't to be looking down the throat, I think was the comment of the property owner. It's over the next 90 days, it's to look and to evaluate those the operations and management plan, see how effective it is, ensure that those calls for service, continue to be reduced, and then to report back to the Planning Commission and allow the Planning Commission to make a determination about the effectiveness of the CUP. So I just want to make sure it was clear about the difference between the deemed approved status and the conditional use permit.
Well, and from the last few that we've done, I mean, the 90 days is not set in stone. It's more of a guideline. If they come to you and say after 90 days, hey, we need a little more time, we haven't had any issues with that, granting more time, if it's appropriate.
I think our intent is to, within 90 days, to report back for the other actions that the Planning Commission's taken. At a minimum, we would provide an update as to the progress on the number of items that they're looking at. So, if there was a situation where, let's say the fencing contractor, there was a supply shortage in bolts and they weren't able to put up the fence, as long as they're diligently pursuing implementing what they've stated, we would report that to the Commission. But we want to make sure that we're continuing to monitor, continuing to have that ongoing conversation with the applicant and operator, and then reporting to the Commission so you're aware of everything that's going on.
Great. Any other questions for staff?
No, I have a comment. Ms. Sally Schiffman made a statement. It seems like you're punishing the property owner for what is happening outside of their control. And Noah just, reiterated that we're not really punishing anyone. It seems to me is that what we're doing is we're making sure that the property owner is doing everything that they can within their power and authority. Then if anything happens outside of their control, it's delineated. We know which is beyond their control and which is. So there's another problem elsewhere. So I think what we're doing is we're putting the lasso around the situation where there's no loose ends where we could say, it was the property owner's fault. No, it wasn't somebody else's fault, so that we don't come into this adversarial position. I think what we're doing here is making things more concrete and more centered on the what the property owner can do with their particular property, rather than eliminate the rights.
Yeah, no, I agree that way. They've done everything they can do. At that point, it would be no question of it was out of their control.
Whose fault it is, yeah.
I understand. All right, well, any other comments? Okay. You know what? Public hearing's closed. I'll tell you what. I'll open it up. I'll give you 1 minute.
You mentioned, well, let's say instead of revocation, you mentioned maybe a happy medium. Is there? I don't know if those are the words you used, or happy somewhere in the middle. Instead of a revocation, do you guys have the power to not revocate the status, but impose some restrictions? So if CUP is here, revocation is here, is there a middle ground?
Well, let me counter that. What objections do you have to a CUP?
It's one of those things where it's never enough. I think that generically speaking is to say, well, crime continues to happen, or this happens. It's one of those things where it's a snowball effect. Well, it's not 100%, so therefore you're in violation. I think that's the major objections we have.
I think, respectfully, I think that I'm not going to make assumptions. I'm just going to speak from my part. We are not here to close businesses. That's not the goal, the scope of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is to ensure that businesses and projects that are in place that have a positive avenue for the community, create revenue, at the same time our positive outlook in the community. We are not here to close and get rid of CUPs. That's why my question stands. What objections would you have should a CUP be brought in place? I'm having issue with that only because we haven't, to my knowledge, we haven't gotten rid of any CUPs, right? So I'm kind of confused why the concern.
I think the concern is obvious. It's a property owner is losing grandfather protections, ownership rights, subject to more conditions.
Well, I don't want to beat a horse, and I know the hour is late. What I would say to you is, from my experience and my 47 years living in the city of El Cajon, and my experience living and working with the Planning Commission, our goal is to work with businesses to keep them in place, not to shut them down. It doesn't make any sense to close down businesses. It doesn't work. The Planning Commission is in place to ensure that barometers are in place, to make sure that it's safe, to make sure that the community at large is getting their interests upheld, and at the same time, ensuring that the business has a fair shot and a fair shake, and not having. I'm the last person to say that we need more oversight. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is we need to just clean things up. We're not trying to shut down a business. That's my concern. Is I don't see anybody on the commission trying to say, oh, you got to have this matrix that is unobtainable. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't even help the community. I just want to ensure you, at least I will speak from my point of view, that makes no sense, and that is not good for the community. It's not good for the El Cajon Police Department. That's not for the community at large. The city is is here to ensure that businesses are in place to create revenue, to be a positive outlook for the community. We are not here to shut businesses down. Sometimes there needs to be cleanup. Maybe there needs to be a little bit more oversight in an aspect of ensuring that compliances and ordinances that are already there are being followed. That is my position. I'm not here to shut down a business. I don't believe, and it's already been spoken, I think at least twice, there hasn't been a CUP that's been shut down. That doesn't mean it can't happen. But what we're saying is this is part of due process. You mentioned due process. This is due process. This is part of it. At least I think so.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could I quickly interject? Mr. Garmo mentioned grandfathering. I think he's referring to legal nonconforming status of some of the hotels and motels prior to the deemed approved were legal nonconforming. That status went away in 2019. It doesn't exist. It doesn't confer any property rights at all on the operators. So the deemed approved is, as Mr. Alvey said, the absolute bare minimum. And a lot of businesses, including any new hotel or motel, has to have a CUP. It's not a punishment.
Right.
I'll make a motion to close public hearing.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Moreau, second by Commissioner Sotile. At least that's what I heard first. Please vote.
Okay. Whatever. Well, I'm ready to make a motion.
All right. Now, there was also some other detailed conditions of approval that Noah was mentioning. Did those need to be in the motion if he wanted to?
Yes. So if the commission was open for the consistency purpose that we talked about, it could be the additional proposed conditions as referenced by staff in the presentation.
Great.
Okay. All right. I move to adopt the next resolution in order revoking deemed approved status, approving a CEQA exemption, and approving conditional use permit number 2023-003, subject to conditions, and also adding the condition that the staff has determined. Direct staff to schedule a review of conditional use permit number 2023-003 within the next 90 days.
I'll second that. Motion made by Commissioner Sotile, seconded by Commissioner Moroz. Please vote. Okay, and the motion carries. So, business as usual, gentlemen. You just continue working with staff. I mean, there's nothing's being infringed here. You guys continue working on it, and I know that staff will continue working. I mean, we have had deemed approved on the liquor stores, over 80 of them now for about 5-6 years. And there's never been one revocation, never anything. So, thank you. All right. Any other items for consideration? Staff?
No additional items from staff.
Any staff communication?
None.
Okay. At this time, I'll make a motion to adjourn. All right, motion made by Commissioner Moreau, seconded by Commissioner Pollock-Rude. Please vote. And meeting is adjourned.